To the rest of the galaxy, oxygen is not air. It is a slow-burning fire. It turns iron into rust. It turns lungs into liquid. It is a Class 5 chemical weapon that creates storms of destruction. Every species in the universe fears that invisible acid. But there is one species that is different. A species born on a death world. They don't just walk through the poison, they are addicted to it. They are humans. And while the rest of the galaxy dies from oxygen poisoning, we pack it into tanks and bring it for lunch. The Galactic Station Zenith was usually a quiet and peaceful place. It was a massive hub for trade where thousands of different species met to sell goods. Some aliens were tall and thin, while others were short and covered in thick fur. They came from different worlds, but they all agreed on one scientific fact. Oxygen was the enemy. To the rest of the galaxy, oxygen was not just a gas. It was a slow-burning fire. It caused metal to rust and crumble in just a few days. It burned the delicate lungs of almost every species known to the Council. If a pipe leaked oxygen, the entire sector went into emergency lockdown. It was a Class 5 biohazard. That is why the arrival of the human caused such a panic in the central cafeteria. The automatic doors slid open with a heavy mechanical sound. The loud chatter in the room stopped instantly. Every eye, sensor, and antenna turned toward the entrance. A heavy boot stepped inside. Then another. The figure was bipedal, standing on two legs, but it was encased in a thick, armored suit. It looked like a walking tank. The suit was bulky, white, and gray, scratched from long years of space travel. But what terrified the aliens most was not the heavy armor. It was the twin yellow tanks strapped to the creature's back. Glip, a small merchant who breathed methane gas, shrank back against the cold metal wall. His 4 eyes went wide with terror. He knew exactly what was inside those yellow tanks. The universal symbol for toxic danger, a white skull, was painted clearly on the side. Underneath the skull, in sharp galactic text, was the chemical formula, O2. The creature was carrying enough concentrated poison to kill everyone in the room. If one of those tanks broke, the corrosive gas would melt their skin and turn the air into acid. The crowd parted like water. No one wanted to be near the oxidizing demon. The human, whose name tag simply read Dave, did not seem to notice the fear surrounding him. He walked with a heavy, stomping rhythm. Thud. 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 He walked straight to an empty table in the center of the room. The aliens closest to him scrambled away in fear, knocking over chairs and spilling their nutrient drinks. Dave ignored them completely. He sat down heavily. The metal chair creaked under the immense weight of his suit and his toxic life support system. He reached up with a thick gloved hand and tapped the glass of his helmet. He checked a small digital gauge on his wrist. It beeped loudly in the silence. Glip held his breath, shaking with fear. He watched the human reach for a valve on the yellow tank. Was the creature crazy? Was he a terrorist? Why would anyone bring such a volatile chemical onto a peaceful station? The human twisted the valve. A sharp, loud hiss echoed through the silent cafeteria. Several aliens screamed and dove under their tables for cover. They expected the burning cloud of death to consume them. But nothing happened. The human simply sighed. The sound was amplified by the speakers in his suit. He wasn't releasing the gas to attack them. He was pumping it into his helmet. The realization hit Glip like a physical blow. The creature wasn't carrying the poison as a weapon. He wasn't trying to blow up the station. The human was breathing it. Inside that sealed helmet, the air was a swirling storm of pure oxygen. The human's lungs were soaking up the corrosive gas, and somehow, he was still alive. To the human, this deadly chemical was fuel. Dave leaned back, relaxed, and watched the room through his dark visor. To the rest of the galaxy, he was a monster made of nightmare biology. He was a creature that lived on fire. And right now, the monster was just looking for lunch. The uneasy silence in the cafeteria did not last long. Suddenly, the white lights in the ceiling turned a deep, warning red. A shrill alarm screamed through the station, hurting the sensitive ears of the alien crew. It was not a drill. It was an invasion alarm. The metal floor beneath their feet began to vibrate. Before anyone could run to the escape pods, the ventilation grates on the ceiling exploded. Debris and metal screws rained down on the tables. From the dark holes in the ceiling, nightmares dropped down into the room. They were the Krakar. The Krakar were a terrifying species of giant insects. They stood on four sharp, clicking legs and had hard, black shells that looked like armor. Their eyes were glowing green orbs that lacked any mercy or emotion. They did not carry laser guns or plasma rifles. They did not need them. The Krakar fought with biology. As soon as the squad of insects hit the floor, they opened vents in their own armor. A thick, yellowish-green fog began to spray out of their bodies. It was high-concentrated sulfur gas. The Krakar were terraformers. They did not just board ships, they changed the air to make it perfect for them and deadly for everyone else. Panic erupted in the cafeteria. For the gentle aliens like Glip, the sulfur gas was an instant nerve agent. As the yellow cloud rolled across the floor, the smaller aliens began to cough violently. Their skin started to itch and burn. Glip fell to his knees, clutching his throat. He tried to crawl toward the door, but the cloud was too fast. The air was becoming thick and poisonous. The Krakar clicked their mandibles in satisfaction. They watched their victims choke and fall. To the insects, this was a simple cleanup operation. They would gas the room, wait for everyone to die, and then take the station's cargo. However, there was one person who was not coughing. Amidst the chaos and the swirling yellow poison, Dave sat perfectly still. The sulfur cloud washed over his table, covering him completely, but he did not move. The Krakar soldiers turned their heads, confused. They waited for the large, white-armored creature to grab its throat and fall. But Dave just slowly stood up. The heavy metal chair scraped loudly against the floor, a sound that cut through the noise of the alarm. Because Dave was human, he was already wearing a sealed environmental suit to survive the normal air of the station. The deadly sulfur gas that was killing everyone else could not touch him. His helmet was airtight. His oxygen tanks were still pumping clean, fresh air into his lungs. He was a walking fortress. Dave looked at the insects, and then he looked at the suffering aliens on the floor. The yellow fog swirled around his legs like water. The Krakar clicked aggressively and stepped forward, raising their sharp front claws. They thought they had trapped a victim. They did not realize they had just locked themselves in a room with a creature that breathed rocket fuel and wore armor for pajamas. Dave cracked his knuckles through his thick gloves and took a step forward. The Krakar soldiers did not understand fear. When their poison gas failed to kill the white-armored giant, they switched to physical violence. One of the insects screeched and leaped through the air. Its sharp claws were designed to tear through thin metal and soft alien flesh. It hit Dave square in the chest with a loud crash. However, the insect immediately regretted this decision. Dave came from Earth, a high-gravity death world. His bone density was triple that of a normal station dweller, and his biohazard suit was reinforced to withstand deep-sea pressure. The insect bounced off Dave's chest like a rubber ball hitting a stone wall. Dave did not even stumble. He simply swung his heavy arm and swatted the creature away. The insect flew across the room and smashed into a table, its shell cracking from the force of the human's casual strength. But the situation was still desperate. Dave was strong, but he was slow, and there were dozens of Krakar pouring from the ceiling vents. They chattered and clicked, surrounding the human like a pack of wolves. Worse, the heavy blast doors of the cafeteria had been sealed shut by the station's computer to contain the sulfur gas. There was no way out. At Dave's feet, the small alien Glip was shivering violently. Glip's skin was turning a sickly gray color as the sulfur filled his lungs. The other aliens in the room had stopped moving. They were unconscious. If the air didn't clear in the next 2 minutes, everyone except Dave would be dead. Dave looked at the sealed door. It was made of thick titanium. Even he could not punch through that. He looked at the insects. There were too many to fight one by one. He needed a way to clear the room instantly. He needed a weapon of mass destruction. His eyes darted to the large air intake vent on the wall near the door. The fans were stopped, clogged by the thick sulfur slime the insects were producing. Then, an idea formed in his mind. It was a crazy, dangerous idea. He reached behind his back and grabbed the release handle of his secondary supply tank. The Krakar stopped their advance. They watched with confused, glowing eyes. They saw the human detach one of the yellow cylinders from his back. They did not understand what he was doing. To them, the tank was just heavy equipment. They did not know that inside that metal cylinder was compressed oxygen, pressurized to 3,000 pounds per square inch. To a sulfur-breathing species, pure oxygen was not just air. It was a corrosive agent. It was chemically violent. It was like spraying pure acid into an open wound. Dave held the tank in both hands. It felt heavy and cold. He looked down at Glip. The little alien looked up with fading eyes, terrified. Dave patted Glip's head with a bulky glove, a silent promise that things were about to get very loud. Dave turned toward the air intake vent. He jammed the nozzle of the yellow tank directly into the ventilation system that recycled the room's air. He gripped the manual release valve. The insects sensed a change in the atmosphere. They hissed and stepped back, their instincts screaming that something was wrong. Dave didn't hesitate. He wasn't just a trapped animal anymore, he was an exterminator. He prepared to unleash the most toxic element in the galaxy. Dave twisted the red steel valve on the top of the tank with all his strength. The seal broke with a deafening screech that sounded like a jet engine starting up. The tank vibrated violently in his hands as the compressed gas escaped. A jet of invisible force shot out of the nozzle. It was pure, 100% oxygen, released at incredibly high pressure. It slammed into the ventilation intake, but Dave angled the nozzle so the spray ricocheted off the wall and blasted directly into the center of the room. The loud hissing noise drowned out the alarm sirens. The Krakar insects froze. They were confused. They could not see the gas. To their eyes, nothing was happening. But then, the invisible wave hit the first row of soldiers. The reaction was instant and horrifying. To a sulfur-based life form, pure oxygen is not just a gas, it is a hyperaccelerant. It reacts violently with the chemicals in their blood and skin. As the invisible cloud washed over the insects, their hard black shells began to bubble. Smoke started to rise from their joints. It looked as if someone had thrown a bucket of acid on them. The insects screamed, a high-pitched sound of absolute agony that shattered glass on the nearby tables. They clawed at their own faces, trying to wipe away the poison, but the poison was the air itself. There was no escape. The pressure from Dave's tank was immense. It created a wind tunnel effect in the cafeteria. The heavy, yellow sulfur fog was blown away instantly, replaced by the crisp, dry, and terrifyingly rich oxygen. The insects in the back of the room tried to run, but the gas filled the space faster than they could move. Their biology betrayed them. As they breathed in panic, they inhaled the oxygen. It burned them from the inside out. They collapsed, twitching and thrashing on the floor as their bodies shut down from extreme oxidation. To them, the room had turned into a furnace, but there were no flames, only the burning touch of the human's breath. On the floor, a miracle was happening for the other victims. The blast of oxygen diluted the sulfur almost immediately. Glip gasped, taking in a sudden lungful of the new air. It was too rich for him. Pure oxygen can make aliens dizzy, but it wasn't lethal like the sulfur. It cleared the toxins from his blood. He stopped choking. He opened his watering eyes and saw a blurry image that he would never forget. He saw Dave standing in the middle of the swirling storm. The human was holding the hissing tank like a heavy machine gun, spraying the death gas across the room. The Krakar were no longer an army. They were a broken, terrified mess. The survivors scrambled over the bodies of their fallen comrades, desperate to get back to the ceiling vents. They did not care about the invasion anymore. They only wanted to get away from the monster in the white suit. To Dave, the scene looked very different. He didn't see acid or fire. He just saw insects running away from a little bit of fresh air. He watched the gauge on the tank drop to 0. The hissing stopped. The tank was empty. The room was silent, except for the whimpering of the defeated aliens. The air was now clean, at least by human standards. Dave disconnected the empty tank and let it drop to the floor with a heavy metallic clang. The silence that followed the chaos was heavy and terrifying. The metal tank rolled across the floor until it hit the wall with a hollow thud. The remaining Krakar soldiers were huddled together near the broken entrance of the cafeteria. Their black armor was dull and pitted from the oxidation burns. They were no longer clicking their claws or screeching for battle. They were shaking. Their green eyes were fixed on the white armored figure standing in the center of the room. To them, Dave was not a soldier. He was a natural disaster. He was standing in a cloud of gas that had just melted their friends, and he looked bored. Dave adjusted the heavy collar of his suit. He saw the security cameras turning toward him. He knew that the station commanders were watching. He knew the surviving insects were watching. He decided to send a message that the galaxy would never forget. He reached up with both hands and grabbed the locking mechanisms on his helmet. The aliens watching on the screens gasped. Glip, who was slowly recovering on the floor, tried to shout a warning. He thought the human was broken. If Dave opened his suit now, the residual sulfur and the high-concentration oxygen would surely destroy his soft pink skin. There was a sharp mechanical click, followed by the hiss of a seal breaking. Dave lifted the heavy helmet off his head. He did not melt. He did not scream. His face was rough and covered in a light stubble of beard. He looked tired. He held the helmet under his arm and stood unprotected in the deadly atmosphere. The surviving Krakar pressed themselves against the back wall, terrified. They could not understand the biology of a creature that could expose its naked face to such a chemical weapon. Dave took a deep, long breath. His chest expanded. He filled his lungs with the gas that was killing the insects. To the aliens, this was the ultimate display of power. It was impossible. It was like watching a creature drink lava. Dave exhaled slowly, blowing a puff of air out of his mouth. He rolled his neck, stretching the muscles that had been cramped inside the suit. He looked directly at the trembling group of giant insects. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to shout anymore. The fear in the room was palpable. He flashed a predatory grin, showing his white teeth. To the insects, it looked like he was preparing to eat them. "That's better," Dave said, his voice echoing naturally in the room without the robotic filter of the suit. He took a step toward the insects, and they shrieked in panic. He gestured to the air around him with a casual wave of his hand. "The air was getting a little stale in here. I freshened it up for you." He took another heavy step forward. "Does anyone else want some fresh air? I have a whole other tank in my room." That was the breaking point. The Krakar did not wait to find out if he was lying. They scrambled over each other, slipping on the floor in their haste to escape. They ran out of the broken door, abandoning their mission, abandoning the station, fleeing from the monster who breathed death. Station security finally arrived 10 minutes later. They did not run in with guns blazing. Instead, they moved slowly and carefully, wearing heavy orange hazmat suits. They were not afraid of the insects, because the insects were already gone. They were afraid of the air. The sensors on their suits were flashing red, warning of critical contamination levels. To the security team, the cafeteria was now a radioactive zone. They scanned the room and saw the melted armor of the enemy soldiers. Then, they saw the human. Dave was sitting on the edge of a table, calmly eating a protein bar he had taken from his pocket. He was still not wearing his helmet. The security captain lowered his weapon, too confused to speak. They had expected a massacre, but instead, they found one human having a snack in the middle of a chemical disaster zone. The station's ventilation system roared back to life overhead. Huge fans began to suck the oxygen-rich air out of the room, replacing it with the standard mix of nitrogen and methane that the rest of the crew needed to survive. As the air composition changed, Dave let out a sigh. He finished his protein bar and picked up his heavy helmet. To him, the clean air of the station was suffocating. He locked the helmet back onto his suit with a sharp click and twisted the valve on his secondary emergency tank. The systems hummed, and he took a breath of his own private atmosphere. The crisis was over. The deadly gas was gone, and the hero was sealed back inside his cage. Glip, the small alien merchant, was the first to approach him. Glip was shaky on his legs, but he was alive. He looked up at the towering white suit with a new feeling. It was not just fear anymore, it was deep reverence. In the eyes of the galaxy, humans had always been seen as weird and fragile because they needed special suits. But now, Glip understood the truth. Humans did not wear suits to protect themselves from the galaxy. They wore suits to protect the galaxy from them. Glip pointed a shaking finger at the empty yellow tank lying on the floor. He asked how Dave could carry such a destructive weapon so casually. He asked if Dave was a secret military agent. Dave laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through the floor. He patted the empty tank and shook his head. He explained that it wasn't a weapon. It was just life. He told Glip that without that high-pressure poison flowing through his veins, he would fall asleep and die. Glip stared in horror. The biology of Earth was insanity. Every human was a walking engine of combustion. Dave reached down and picked up the empty tank with one hand, tossing it over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. He told the security team that he was going to his quarters to refill. He winked at Glip and said that he gets grumpy when his oxygen levels get low. Life on Station Zenith returned to normal, but things had changed. No one sat near Dave in the cafeteria anymore, but not because they were being rude. They gave him space out of respect. Whenever Dave walked down the hallway, the crowds parted to let the oxygen lord pass. The story of the cafeteria battle spread to every corner of the trade routes. Pirates and criminals learned a new rule: never board a ship that carries yellow tanks. And on the door of Dave's sleeping quarters, the station management added a new, permanent sign. It was painted in bright red letters for everyone to see. It read, "Danger, extreme oxygen levels. Class 5 Death World Environment. Do not knock. The human is breathing."